Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're going to start. Dynamic. Huh? Please take your seats. We're going to start. Okay. Please take your seats. Please. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. I'm Nino Evgenidze, Executive Director for Economic Policy Research Center, and we are delighted together with the Heritage Foundation to hosting tonight this very interesting discussion, because we're going to have a wonderful panel today. I would like to introduce Mr. Luke Coffey from the Heritage Foundation, the author of this very interesting report, NATO membership for Georgia in US and European interest. Mr. Mikhail Janelidze, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Georgia. Mr. Ian Kelly, Ambassador of United States to Georgia. Mr. Batu Kutelia, who is the Vice President of Atlantic Council, and Shota Guineria from EPRC, Senior Fellow. And I would like to ask to Shota as well to moderate this discussion today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Nino. Thank you all for being with us. Wow, look, what a crowd, you see? It is probably because you have come up with a very interesting report in a very timely manner. May I ask you, before we start discussing the content of the report, so why you decided to write this full-bodied paper on Georgia at this time? You know, this year we're going to have a NATO summit in summer. There are some high expectations that this summit should deliver some tangible results for Georgia. And these kind of discussions, of course, contribute to the debate on what exactly can Georgia expect from NATO, and especially from this kind of very high forums like this upcoming summit. So please, if you could tell us a little bit about the background of this report and what you think is the most important message that you wanted to send with this report.
Thank you, Shota. Can you hear me? Is this great? Gamarjoba. It's great always to be here in Georgia. I mean, this crowd, thank you for coming on a busy evening to listen to this panel. I think maybe I'm living in the wrong country, because when I have events at the Heritage Foundation, it's like 10 people show up. No, I really appreciate everyone coming to listen to this debate tonight. Shota, you asked about sort of the genesis behind my report and why I decided to write it and why now. And I'd say there's a couple of reasons, really. Firstly, I've been a Georgia watcher, as we say in Washington, for a long time now. I'm a regular visitor to this beautiful country, and I follow events very closely, and I want to do my very small contribution to help Georgia along the transatlantic path. And also, it has a lot to do with timing. As you mentioned, 2018 marks an important year for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's the 10th anniversary of Bucharest Summit. It's the 10th anniversary of the Russian invasion and the subsequent illegal occupation of 20% of your country's internationally recognized territory. And I've been writing regularly about Georgia, but normally they've been smaller pieces, an opinion piece here, an op-ed here, a small policy paper here, but I thought I'd wrap it all together and focus on like a big picture, a big strategy on how to get the US, NATO, Georgia relationship closer. But perhaps my biggest motivation was, as someone who is a Georgia watcher and someone who has attended numerous conferences and seminars and meetings, frankly speaking, I am tired of hearing the same thing over and over again, and I want to try to inject new thinking, new ideas into this debate about how we get Georgia closer to the transatlantic community. And I want to do so in a way that can maybe shape new thinking or spark a discussion and a debate. And already my report, I think, has been a success in that sense, because it is my understanding since coming here that it is a topic of discussion. So that's really my motivation behind it.
Well, great. Luke, thank you so much once again for this, because this report has an extraordinary level of detail, but it is also strategic, and it sees the big picture about how we should approach Georgia's membership into NATO. It shouldn't be only built on the technicalities, and there should be this big political issues also involved, and there are, of course, very big political issues involved in the integration process. But the recommendations that you have come up with, 20 of them, I love all of them, but there are some very interesting ones, the new ones, so I hope we will have a chance to discuss all of those. But now let me ask the foreign minister a question. First of all, before we go into the details of the report, I guess we will have a lot more time for that. May I ask you, what is your strategy of Georgia's integration into NATO? What are your specific objectives for the upcoming summit? What is that you expect in the best case, and what's going to be your program minimum? So what would you expect in the short run, and how are you going to achieve these goals?
Thank you very much. Who said that there is no interest towards NATO in Georgia? I think the public shows that there is great interest and big interest towards Georgia's NATO membership. And I would also start with a small recommendation from my side. The report should be called NATO membership for Georgia in US and European interest, and we should add in Georgia's interest as well. So because first of all, it is in Georgia's interest to become a member of NATO, and that's why government of Georgia is doing everything in order to make the case of Georgia interesting for our partners, for the United States, for European partners, and for the whole alliance. We believe that we actually achieved a lot on the integration path. And it is well reflected in the report, and I would like to thank you, Luke, for actually reflecting this progress very well, and with figures and with indicators. There are some other indicators as well, which clearly shows the very tangible progress, which brings us to membership, which is our ultimate goal. The decisions, also the latest decisions, especially the Warsaw Summit decision, was very important, where it clearly actually showed to everyone and gave a message that Georgia has all practical instruments which are needed for eventual membership, and leads us to eventual membership in NATO. So this is our strategy, the strategy of the government of Georgia, to use all these instruments which are declared by the alliance as the instruments leading us to membership effectively, to deliver on all the reforms which are envisaged by annual national plan, as well as achieve the most possible and effective success in implementation of NATO-Georgia substantial package, and we are really successful in that path, as well as use a NATO-Georgia Commission effectively in order to discuss not only practical issues of integration, but also political issues of integration. We believe that last year was really a remarkable year in our relations with NATO. First of all, we were able to hold in Georgia the Parliamentary Assembly session, which was important because it was not talk only about with the governments and you know, the missions in the alliance, but also to talk here in Georgia directly with the politicians taking decisions in the capitals. And I'm happy that most of participants actually left Georgia with a big impression. They left Georgia with an impression that Georgia is really moving towards NATO standards, and Georgia is a very strong partner country being on the road of the membership. With regards to the particular and at the same time, we had several NGCs held, more than 20 NGCs, if I'm not mistaken. NATO was very visible in Georgia, and also it was that 2017 was followed also with very strong messaging from the United States, from the new administration, which was also very important. You know, the early position of the U.S. administration about Georgia's NATO aspirations, which was actually delivered. This message was delivered by Vice President Pence during his visit in Georgia. It was also very clearly stated after the NATO-Georgia Commission meeting in December in Brussels by the State Secretary, and it shows that President Trump's administration and new administration of the United States stands by the Bucharest decision that Georgia will become the member of NATO, and we will take relevant steps to make it happen. The relevant steps, I think, are related also to the raising the defense capabilities of Georgia, and I have to stress the importance of the deepened defense and security cooperation between Georgia and the United States, which happened last year with the relevant program on defense and security, as well as our new actually cooperation in the military equipment field. So we believe that Georgia is really coming to the summit in a very good shape. We believe that summit should reflect this progress, first of all, on the membership path of Georgia, should reflect it in the context of open door policy, as well as actually it should be reflected in relevant formats where Georgia will be represented on the NATO summit. As you rightly mentioned, this year, 2018, actually covers a lot of substance, because it's 10 years after Bucharest decision, it is 10 years after Russian invasion, so many actually goals and targets have been achieved after those decisions or actually events. So I think it will be very important that in the relevant formats it is discussed in the frames of the summit of NATO. At the same time, we are having actually expectation of increased practical cooperation, and especially it goes in line with your recommendations. It is about Black Sea security. Georgia and NATO have decided to explore these opportunities and possibilities during the Warsaw Summit. We are very much interested in that dialogue, in that cooperation. We have tabled our proposals, and we are working with NATO for more than 1 year already in order to have practical actually results and decisions with regards to this cooperation. So this is the strategy. these are the expectations and actually the motivation of the government of Georgia, together with the relevant strategic communication here in Georgia, in order to keep popular support to that path, which is a very important path and which leads us to stronger institutions, which leads us to more stability and development.
Well, thank you, Minister. Ambassador, we all know that we're living in a very difficult security environment. And not only in this region, but also in the Euro-Atlantic area, there are a lot of challenges. This can be seen from different perspectives in a different way. For example, some Georgians think, I think many Georgians think, that because there is such an complicated security environment and because Russia is contributing significantly to creating this unfavorable security environment, Georgia should be pushed towards European and Euro-Atlantic structures even more. And Georgia is in a way a battlefield for the international rules-based security system or international system. Well, actually, Georgia is bigger than Georgia is something that we have heard several times here in Tbilisi and also in other places. But honestly speaking, even from very good friends of Georgia, we have heard for many times that because of this international environment, you know, now it might not be the right time for the big decisions, for the breakthroughs, and we should wait for some hypothetical window of opportunity, and then there's going to be a moment when the integration into European and Euro-Atlantic integrations would come. And I never managed to figure out what this moment might be. What are we even waiting for? I mean, is there any strategic component in the strategic patience, or it's just, you know, waiting for something that we don't know? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, our position is clear and was made even more clear and unambiguous when the Vice President was here last year, as the Foreign Minister pointed out, that we believe that Georgia will become a member of NATO. You mentioned concerns about possible reactions of other countries and concerns about perhaps insecurity arising from that. I happen to think that the enlargement of NATO and the enlargement of the EU has led to the greatest expansion of the zone of prosperity and security in recent history. And I also reject vehemently the idea that NATO is a threat to any other country. And so I think the main reason why we say Georgia will become a NATO member is because we reject that premise that the enlargement of NATO up to Russia's borders is somehow some kind of threat to Russia itself. I think that the enlargement of NATO into the Baltic states in many ways, I think, contributed more to Russia's security, because part of the fact of joining NATO, implicit in it, is the whole idea that you are subsuming a lot of your sovereign interests into a collective organization. I was at NATO in I think it was 2006 when there was the great controversy over the bronze soldier. And we were able to really manage that conflict between Russia and Estonia because we were able to, I think, we were able to minimize some of the more nationalistic impulses, and I think it contributed to a successful resolution of that. I think the other issue here, of course, is that we reject the idea, or we very much support the idea that every country has the sovereign right to choose its own security arrangements and has the right to choose its own alliances. And if you accept the idea that NATO is not a threat to Russia, then the fact of Georgia joining NATO is in no way, shape, or form any kind of threat. And this principle is very important, and if we somehow say that enlargement can't include Georgia because of our fears of the Russian reaction, we actually are contributing, I think, to international insecurity by rejecting this principle, this very important principle that every country has the right to join its own, to make its own choices in terms of its security arrangements. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Well, great. Thank you so much for this answer. I think this is what I personally wanted to hear from the US ambassador regarding this question. But Batu, you have worked as the Georgian ambassador in the United States, and you know probably better than I do that the United States has always been the main driving force of Georgia's NATO integration process. And the indications and the processes that we see with this current administration are very positive and promising. On the other hand, if you test the air here in Tbilisi, especially after Luke came up with this wonderful report, you see that there is a lot of debate about Georgia's future in NATO. And we see a lot of Russian propaganda trying to twist the messages that we want to send out. And in many cases, unfortunately, they are successful. And I have seen great comments by Luke about his report here with the Georgian media, but if you scroll down and you see the comments to these reports of the Georgian media, they are very controversial. So why do you think we are not able to get out this message out so strongly? Because you see here the room full of supporters of Georgia's European and Euro-Atlantic aspirations, and there are some more, you know, and the polls obviously prove that. The vast majority of the Georgian population support this course, but somehow this narrative is not as visible as it could be. So what do you think we should do better in this regard?
Shota, thank you very much. I would like to thank Luke once again. Luke, you did it. And the outcome of this report, I guess, should be a very comprehensive policy, strategy, and the tactical components of it, which are all very well described here. That's why I think this report and recommendations, and particularly the NATO integration component of recommendations, is bulletproof, or let's say the propaganda proof. The only thing we have to do is to better explain to our domestic public, but also work with our partners and allies in Europe. And I firmly believe that Georgia's NATO integration will largely depend on the US leadership role. It has been like this since Georgia regained independence. And this report also covers quite well all the major components of our bilateral cooperation with the United States. And if we look very carefully, these are the building blocks of the Georgian state: democracy, defense, security, national consensus. All these components have been on the other, from the other side, targeted by the Russian propaganda or Russia hybrid warfare. So it's quite clear who is enemy and who is friend. And this track record has a quarter of century of very strong support, notwithstanding the change of the administrations in the US or in Georgia. And it's strongly based on the strong public support in Georgia, with some alarming signals recently of a decline of the pro-Western sentiments in Georgian public, which as a figures are not alarming, but the tendency needs to be paid attention. So on the other hand, what is important for us, based on this report as well as the way ahead, is, and the Heritage Foundation indicated Georgia as the most improved country in the recent years, how to make this process irreversible. And irreversibility, of course, largely depends on us, what we do here in Georgia, maintaining, very importantly, high democratic credentials, not compromising on the values, because this is the component based on which we are the strategic partner of the United States and the free democratic world. And another important component, of course, is constantly consolidating national consensus on the key strategic choices, particularly Georgia's Western integration. Now, going to the purely military component of it, and Shota, in your question you mentioned that there are some arguments that maybe timing is not right now good for Georgia's NATO membership. I think just the opposite. Now is the best timing to push fast forward Georgia's NATO integration. For many reasons, and especially after 2008 Russian invasion in Georgia and 8-9 years of Russia's aggressive revisionism, now we have a consensus in the Western world that Russia is the major threat to the free world, to the democracy, democratic ideals, and we are on the same side with the democratic world. So the momentum is right. All the components are in place. Political is, in the United States, is there. We have a bipartisan support of US-Georgia strategic partnership. There are pragmatic manifestations, as Minister mentioned, delivering of the Javelin missiles. But now I think is the right momentum to have a comprehensive Georgia policy in the United States, and of course this is the work that we have to do. Of course, maintaining strong public support here domestically, but also building this support together with our major strategic partner, United States, in Europe. Because again, though this concept is a propaganda proof, we should anticipate that Russian propaganda will try to twist this message. Of course, if you ask this question to this auditorium, I barely could see any single hand who would vote against the suggested way of Georgia's accelerated NATO membership. But if we go outside, of course, as you rightly said, there are sentiments of controversy fueled by the Russian propaganda machine, which has already quite well deployed infrastructure in Georgia. So again, I think that this report gives us a very good basis for the comprehensive policy that needs to be built up by both sides.
Great, Batu, thank you. Let me take this back to Luke and let me try to focus more on the report itself. For me, the most important thing in this report is the map. The map that you have come up with, and actually it's a miracle that Luke is the first person with this idea to introduce a map of all the instances of the illegal borderization along the occupation line of Georgia. And you have learned and studied more than 50 instances of this borderization, 56 to be precise. And I think this will lead very well into this core of discussions about the report, the occupied territories and NATO membership of Georgia. I personally, as an expert, think that we should try to decouple these two issues as much as possible. And unfortunately, we have not been as clear as we should be, I guess, because this propaganda, they could twist anything. Look, I mean, if we take this as a base of what they will say, then we will not be able to say anything. But at least in this debate, we should have a winning argument that these occupied territories cannot be the obstacle on Georgia's NATO integration path. Otherwise, we give Russians a recipe of stopping the enlargement processes of the European and Euro-Atlantic integrations by destabilizing and by attacking the nations which are considered to be aspirant countries. And it's kind of an encouragement of that if we're not really clear on this. So I guess this is the message that you first and foremost wanted to get across. But please tell me, what is this map all about? And then let's go into the discussions on the suggestion that you have.
Thank you. Thanks, Shota. First I want to stress the independence of this report. The Heritage Foundation is a politically conservative think tank. We believe in limited government and we believe in low taxes. We don't take government money, or taxpayers' money as we like to call it, from the U.S. government, and we don't take it from foreign governments. So I don't represent any views of the U.S. government or any other government. I'm an independent analyst at a think tank, and a think tank's job is to create new ideas and try to get a debate going. So that's why doing this report, I really thought to myself, in all my experience working with, talking to different government officials around Europe, talking to officials in the United States, talking to commentators, staffers in parliaments across Europe or on the Hill in the US, what is the reoccurring thing I always hear? And I kept hearing some variation of the following. We can't allow Georgia to join NATO while part of its country is occupied, because wouldn't this automatically mean a war with Russia? And I thought to myself, well, no, not necessarily. And what's a good way to articulate a rebuttal to this? How can we remove this issue from the broader debate about NATO's membership? And that's why I came up with the recommendation about Georgia joining NATO, all of Georgia, as recognized in Georgia's internationally recognized borders, to include Shkin Valley region and Abkhazia, to join NATO. But only the bits of Georgia not under occupation would get the Article 5 security guarantee until the occupation is ended peacefully. And I want to stress, if you read the report, it's very clear. I am not questioning Georgia's commitment, NATO's commitment, America's commitment to the territorial integrity of Georgia. Quite the contrary, actually. But what I am saying is that because Georgia already has a non-use of force pledge to get these regions back, successive Georgian governments have committed to not using military force to get these regions back. Why would you need an Article 5 security guarantee for these two regions? I think it's an unnecessary roadblock to Georgia's entry into NATO. And someday, God willing, when all of Georgia's territorial integrity is restored, to include Shkin Valley region, to include Abkhazia, then we can go back and review Article 6 of the treaty and give all of Georgia the Article 5 protection. But so long as these two regions are under Russian occupation, I don't see why the Article 5 security guarantee has to apply. And I'll tell you this, Russia thinks that it can stop any country in the region from joining NATO or the European Union by simply invading and partially occupying that country. And if you remove the occupation from the equation, it denies Russia that de facto veto that they seem to have. So that is, the big recommendation in the paper. If you notice, I don't apply any timeline to this. I'm not saying that, of course, this shouldn't even be considered to happen by July. I mean, there's absolutely no way. It could take years. But I promise you this, if you wait until Russia leaves Shkin-Valley and Abkhazia, you're going to wait even longer to join NATO. And I stress, this is not giving up on Georgia's territorial integrity at all. But this is offering a realistic and pragmatic way to bring Georgia into the alliance faster. Now, I just want to add one more thing, Shota. This paper has 20 recommendations. Some of them are unique. The first I've ever, I've not read them elsewhere. There's no plagiarism or anything. And it's unfortunate that this one issue, this one recommendation of mine has completely crowded out all the other proposals I make about making that U.S.-Georgia relationship closer and stronger. So maybe we can have a chance to talk about that later.
Sure.
Thank you.
The following question, look, I mean, the thunder was stolen by this one particular recommendation, and there are many, many other recommendations which will enormously facilitate Georgia's NATO integration process. So if you could discuss a little bit about the others and what do you think should happen in a shorter period of time. Some of them are long-term recommendations, but what do you think are the steps that we should be taking as we speak to achieve best possible results for the upcoming summit?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things. There are practical measures and there are political measures that the U.S. and NATO can take ahead of the summit. Some of the political measures are very simple. It's just continuing to state very clearly, as the ambassador just did, that Georgia will someday join NATO and show real commitment to that. But there are ways to do this, perhaps, that are better than others. Firstly, the NATO-Georgia Commission, I recommend, should be meeting at the heads of government, heads of state level. 10th anniversary of Bucharest. It's never met at that level at a NATO summit before. This would be a good opportunity to send a very high-level political message that NATO's still committed very clearly to Georgia's membership. There are some practical issues. Black Sea security is one. Any way we can get the NATO flag flying in Georgia, get NATO member states here in Georgia, I think is a positive thing. So one of my more unconventional recommendations was that NATO should open up a NATO-certified Center of Excellence for Black Sea security in Georgia. The Black Sea offers many diplomatic and security challenges, and why not create a center of excellence that can allow the members and partners in the Black Sea region to come up with better doctrine, better ideas, better proposals on how to manage the security in the region. Another idea to increase the U.S.-Georgia defense relationship is the U.S. should invite Georgia to offer a contribution to the U.S.-led battalion in Poland as part of NATO's forward enhanced presence. The rebuttal to this as well, Georgia's not in NATO and this is, a collective defense operation in Poland and the Baltic states. Well, if Georgia is good enough to be in the NRF, if Georgia is good enough to sacrifice more than 30 young men in Helmand province in southern Afghanistan, then Georgia is damn well good enough to send a company of troops to Poland to get closer to the United States, to get closer to the Poles and to other countries in the region. So, those are just two quick ones. We finally achieved what many thought was the impossible by providing Javelin anti-tank weapons to Georgia. The Trump administration did in 8 months what the Obama administration failed to do in 8 years, and I think there's momentum here, and I think the next stage now is thinking about air defense capabilities, for example. So there are quite a few things that, initiatives and proposals that have been completely crowded out by my suggestion of amending Article 6 of the 1949 North Atlantic Treaty. So I think that it's worth discussing some of these other proposals as well.
Minister, let me ask you to follow up on this issue and ask you, what is your ongoing conversation on this particular issue with the allies or with the alliance at this point? Because we cannot deny that this is an issue. This is a big political issue that has to be addressed one way or another. I was just interested, what is your vision and take on this?
So first of all, you've been in the government for a long time in these negotiations, and now you are in the President's administration, so we should know what are the talks and what we are talking about. And I'm here, first of all, to make one give one very simple message to our people. The only priority of the government of Georgia, and for me as a foreign minister and for the whole cabinet, is to achieve territorial integrity and sovereignty of our country. This is the top priority, and every negotiation, every consultation with every partner, will it be in NATO format, will it be in, with the EU or within other multilateral organizations or bilateral formats, are used to agree and act together with partners in a direction of restoring territorial integrity and sovereignty of Georgia. This is the message to take away food from Russian propaganda machine, because we see during these days how it picked up some actually points and actually tries to mislead the society and actually with that downgrade the support towards Georgia's NATO aspirations and support of our people toward Georgia's aspirations. Our NATO integration and EU integration and all our international relations and especially NATO integration, I would say, is oriented on making our country stronger, our security more capable to ensure the interests, national interests of our country, to ensure our country's stable and democratic development with its entirety. We believe that the actions which we are undertaking in that process are making Georgia more capable to lead the reintegration process peacefully, to lead the reconciliation and engagement policy, and make sure that everyone on the whole territory of Georgia, including in the occupied territories now, but in the future and currently in possible ways, have opportunity to get benefits of our NATO and European integration process. And I believe that the territorial integrity and sovereignty is, as it was mentioned already, is not under the question of NATO and by NATO. The decision that Georgia will become a member of NATO was made when Georgia was not exercising effective control over the territories, breakaway territories. This decision was reiterated on every summit, even when our territories were occupied since 2008. So there is no actually subject to discuss, and definitely we pursue together with the alliance the process of integration, which is in the interest of our country and in the interest of our, in line with our national interests.
Just for the record, I have never been in the government. I never held any political appointments. And what I know is one thing. But, Minister, this is what we wanted to hear from you. So this is why we invited to the panel. And thanks for being with us today.
May I argue that you were not in government?
No.
You were my advisor. You were advisor of the defense minister, and directly involved in the negotiations.
But we're not here to discuss my career, unfortunately. So
I didn't cover this subject in my report, actually. His career progression. So.
Ambassador, there are 20 very interesting recommendations in this report. One of them concerned the possible sanctions, conditional sanctions on Russia in case they will be taking any further steps towards annexation of the occupied territories. I found this recommendation very interesting. So I wonder if there has been or could be any discussions on this in the United States government or on the Hill, and if you have heard any possibilities of such package being prepared, and from your perspective, what would you point out as the most interesting recommendation from your side?
Yeah, thanks very much, Shoda. I think both the executive and the legislative branches of the U.S. government we are very much focused on the idea of deterring further interference, further territorial aggression, and a lot of what we do is designed toward that end, to prevent further Russian aggression. I think, as several people have pointed out, we have made the decision to provide lethal assistance to Georgia, and that's, I think, part of this. We, I think, will take every opportunity to push back against further moves towards annexation, illegal annexation of these two territories of Georgia. I think that at this point, I think Russia understands, particularly after the unified approach of both the EU and the United States to impose sanctions after the illegal annexation of Crimea, I think Russia understands that there will be real costs imposed on Russia for further such aggression or further such illegal annexation. In terms of what I like most about Luke's report, well, I liked just about all of Luke's report. I will say, regarding this one, I think, rather uncontroversial suggestion that he made. As Luke says, the Heritage Foundation is not part of the United States government. This does not represent a U.S. policy or even a U.S. suggestion, but it's designed to do what we're doing right now, which is to look at how we can help Georgia attain its aspirations, its sovereign aspirations to join NATO. I think in terms of the recommendations that I thought had the most resonance in terms of present challenges and threats, I think the idea about bringing Georgia into a multilateral response to the challenges that Russia presents in the Black Sea. I think that, to me, has the most resonance with the U.S. and I think with a lot of our NATO allies and other partners as well. And I think there's a good chance at the NATO summit that there will be a broader discussion of how we preclude the Black Sea from what seems to be some unilateral moves toward making the Black Sea into a Russian lake. So I think that this is an issue which NATO has to discuss, and I like some of the ideas that Luke has in that regard.
Thank you, Ambassador. Batu, from your expert's perspective, you have been working on these issues for long enough. Please help me to summarize these 20 recommendations briefly before we give floor to the audience and before we go to the questions.
Well, with great pleasure. And one of the key components in terms of linking the two most important strategic priorities for Georgia, as Minister said, restoring territorial integrity and NATO membership, is the, let's say, formal and quite a compact conclusion of this report. What I mean, the shortest, the most effective way of restoring Georgia's territorial integrity peacefully goes through the Georgia's NATO membership. This is the only and the most effective option to restore Georgia's territorial integrity and also make this process peacefully. Another component, of course, which makes this report also important, and its complexity, how this can be done. And this can be done with an extensive political, economic and military presence of United States in the wider Black Sea region and on the Georgian soil. And there are few recommendations that advocates for this, which is a naval patrolling on the Black Sea, Georgia as a location for the U.S. operations, not only in the Black Sea, but maybe farther in a wider region, whether it would be the logistical support or actual military presence on Georgian territory. And I'm particularly excited with military components that are designed to contradict Russia's anti-access denial concept on the Black Sea, which became the NATO's and the Europe's security problem since Russia's occupation and annexation of the Crimea. So we have all the components. Well, I would like to see more U.S. economic or financial business presence in Georgia as well. That would be a reinforcing factor of the strategic importance of Georgia. And the best solution, again, going back to the importance of communicating what is described in this report to the public, we need more U.S. presence in Georgia and in the region.
Well, great. Thank you to all of you. Now it's your turn, audience, please. Georgi Muchaidze, I see your hand there. And then Georgi Oniani here on the left. Let's collect a few questions, 2 or 3, and then respond to this. Please identify yourselves and identify to whom you want to address this question.
Thank you. Georgi Muchaidze, Executive Director of Atlantic Council of Georgia. First of all, let me thank Luke for this very comprehensive report, which is pretty detailed, and at the same time, the big picture is not lost. And here is very well elaborated why the Georgian membership is also beneficial, not only to this country and the population, but also to European and Euro-Atlantic security, and thank you very much for that. Now regarding regarding my question, and I'll ask only one question, but an issue that is on everybody's minds, I think, since reading this report. And this is not a new issue, but so well elaborated, and from the American side, it has been never presented. I'm talking about non-extension of the Article 5 to the occupied territories. And my question is to Minister Janelidze, because nobody can deny that the concern from some skeptical NATO allies is there, that if Georgia enters NATO, then the Article 5 can be activated. And then there is a threat or concern for them for the direct confrontation, military confrontation with Russia. So this is a real concern that kind of prevents, and at least it's one of the major stumble blocks for consensus to be emerged on Georgian membership between NATO members. So I think the proposal by Luke to temporarily not extend the Article 5 on the occupied territories actually denies Russia the informal veto that it enjoys on time being by occupying these territories and not letting us restore our territorial integrity. So it's a good opportunity to deny Russia this veto by removing, at least strongly mitigating this concern. So the question is Foreign Ministry doing anything in this respect, and if there is any talks between the Foreign Ministry and the NATO counterparts? Thank you.
Thank you, Georgi. It was Georgi here and then Salome here.
Hello. Thank you very much. My name is Georgi Oniani. I represent Transparency International Georgia. Thank you to the panel. Thanks for brilliant presentations. My question goes to the ambassador. Ambassador, and the response to this question might seem a little bit easier one or on everyone's minds, but still I would like to hear this with you. It seems to me that that there is a kind of so we're taking this U.S. bipartisan support, or this great support from the U.S. kind of for granted. Like, we think that this support is here now and it will always be there. And this has been really, this administration has shown really, I mean, greatly this support towards Georgia. So the question is, to what extent does this support is conditioned to by the quality of democracy of this country? Because the civil society is somewhat concerned with certain developments with regards to corruption, to media environment, some other issues. So if you could please elaborate on this. Thank you.
Just for your information, Ambassador and the Minister will stay here with us, and Luke is leaving tomorrow. So if you have any questions to him.
Thank you. Salome Samandashvili, Deputy Chair of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Parliament of Georgia from the United National Movement. First of all, indeed, thanks a lot for your report. We do need these voices in the West these days, and it's much appreciated. I will not talk further about the concerns that we have of the ways in which the current Georgian government might be making it easier for the skeptics in NATO to further delay the question of accession to NATO due to the state of democracy in this country, because I want to talk about the more global issues which you are touching on in your report. And this concerns the question of the sanctions with respect to Russia. What you are suggesting to have the conditional provision for the sanctions in the future, I understand that, but on the other hand, we do have the situation where Russia has gone very far in terms of violating already existing agreements. So my position would be that we need the sanctions actually now and not in the future. And this would also help very much in terms of mitigating the Russian propaganda, because I think the Georgian public would need to see that the West is willing to increase pressure on Russia while simultaneously considering the kind of arrangements which you are suggesting with respect to the application of Article 5. So I have a question to the Foreign Minister. It seems that the red line in Georgia-Russia relations very much remains accession to the NATO. We see also this after the last statements of Mr. Karasin. You were warned not to advance on NATO accession paths, and that would be detrimental to normalization of the relations with Russia. So why aren't you pushing either for sanctions on Russia or joining the sanctions regime? How do you think this will worsen your ongoing, the framework of relationship with Russia? And then I have a question for all the speakers who want to maybe respond. Looking forward a decade, because this issue will stay with us for years to come, as we are entering the very interesting time in Russian domestic politics when Putin will be re-elected, and then the question is what is post-Putin, if there is post-Putin era coming. Will this, in your view, make Georgia-Russia relationships even more difficult with respect to NATO? Because certainly if there is a preparation for post-Putin regime in Russia, it would be very dangerous for future leader to show the weakness with respect to the neighborhood. So do you think that there is actually a window of opportunity which might even get more narrow in the future? Thank you.
So I guess we have enough questions for first round, so if you would like to respond. Minister, yeah.
To me? So, first question was by Mr. Muchaidze about concerns of some skeptical countries that if Georgia enters NATO, it will start military confrontation with Russia. I know that this narrative exists, and I know that Russia is trying to push this narrative actually within the political circles of the different members of the alliance in order to hinder the process of the Georgia's integration in Russia, in NATO, but it should be very naive to actually think that it is a relevant question, because we know that every NATO expansion led to more stability actually on the borders, including with Russia. As Ambassador mentioned, as Ambassador Kelly mentioned, it led to more prosperity and more actually development. And finally, it appeared to be interest also in Russia to have developed and safe borders, including borders with NATO member countries. So with regard to Georgia's intention, it is clearly stated. It was also mentioned by Luke that Georgia has taken unilateral pledge that we will not use force. And it was not just statement, but it was a legally binding pledge for restoring our territorial integrity. So therefore, we should not be helpful to those Russian rumors that someone is afraid or is so naive to think that Georgia's membership can lead to military confrontation of NATO with Russia. The same goes with regards to the de facto veto of Russia. Again, I will base my answer on the answer of Ambassador Kelly, that if we will support this narrative, which is also very much in the interest of Russia, and you mentioned Karasin's statement that they will actually, this is a red line and they are against of Georgia's NATO membership or expansion of NATO infrastructure closer to Russia. If we will take it as a fact, it means that we, and if we will reiterate this Russian narrative, it means that we are playing the Russian game, playing the game which says that one country, Russia, has veto power on the sovereign decisions of the countries and can threaten and actually directly put veto on the decision of the alliance, which is the strongest alliance in the history of the world, which is the alliance oriented on defense and security of its members, which is a defensive alliance, and which is alliance about democracy, which is about prosperity and about development. With regard to sanctions, I would like to also touch this issue. Actually, never Georgian government has been so active as it is during last years, in order to activate international community and consolidate their position against Russian illegal activities with regards to Georgia. And we achieved a lot on that path, especially we will, for instance, take several results of the last year, resolutions taken in the UN, decisions taken by the Council of Europe about recognizing Russia as a country exercising effective control over the occupied territories. It will take a decision of the US Congress and then signed by the President of the United States, the Appropriations Act, which puts sanctions on and actually bans the financial support on all the countries which actually have any and would have any contact with the de facto authorities or occupied regions. This is all our results and indicators what we are doing in order to consolidate position of the international community and our partners against the Russian illegal activities. So I think it is very irrelevant to talk about the Georgia's interest not to join or not to undertake any actions, and which is actually which, according to some explanations, can lead to some more confrontation with Russia. We are occupied by Russia. Russia is undertaking steps every day undermining our sovereignty, our sovereign policy aspirations, and I think that international community recognizes that, and also it was well reflected in the statement and position of the U.S. ambassador just recently. Thank you.
On you asked about 10 years from now, what could the situation look like? And is the window narrowing? When things are recorded and on the internet forever, in my profession, it's very dangerous to make predictions because usually you're very wrong and then it's on YouTube forever. But I will say this, you say specifically 10 years. Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary joined NATO in 1999. 10 years before, imagine in 1989, imagine someone telling you that in 10 years from now, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic will be members of NATO. Completely unheard of. So a lot can change in 10 years, and we don't know where the world will be going exactly, but we do know that when we do see opportunities, we need to seize them.
Well, I think Georgia has shown itself to be a capable future member, a capable ally. It has shown that it is a net contributor to Euro-Atlantic security. Georgia, of course, contributes 2% of its GMP to military spending, and not every NATO ally can say that. It has taken very necessary steps to reform the defense ministry here. It has shown that there is very firm civilian control over the military and that its budget process is transparent. These are all very necessary prerequisites for becoming a member of this community of democratic values. Now, Georgi, if you're asking me, do I have concerns about the quality of democratic development here? The answer to that is yes. I do have concerns. I have concerns about the need to develop mechanisms for better oversight of the security services here. I have concerns about trying to develop a mechanism for interagency coordination of national security policy. But the key thing, I think, in both of those regards is the Georgian society recognizes these as issues to be addressed, and the Georgian government has recognized these two areas: oversight of the security services and interagency policy coordination, as issues that need further development. So I don't think you are asking me if some of these concerns that I have would prevent me from supporting Georgia's NATO membership, but if you were asking me that, I would say absolutely not. I think Georgia should get into NATO today. Sure, it has a lot of things it has to work on, but I have faith in the system here that these issues will be addressed.
You're the best ever AIDS ambassador of the United States to Georgia. You are the best ever AIDS ambassador to Georgia. Yeah. Patu, please.
Thank you, Shota. I heard you, so I have a question to Luke, if I may.
You can't think that.
Is that allowed for the?
Okay, that's we have to be innovative. So your suggestions are innovative, so we have to innovate. No, my question is actually we said that the context is very favorable. Window of opportunity needs to be constructed by us and opened by us. So, and this report gives a lot of good ideas, in a very consolidated manner. So, look, how you would see, what you would recommend Georgian government doing to materialize the recommendations you gave, and particularly the NATO accession recommendation, amending Article 6, suspending Article 5 on occupied territories, and Georgia rapidly joining the NATO?
Well, the first thing I would recommend is that Georgia continues to do what it's doing. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate and so hopeful that Georgia will be a member of NATO is because it's proven itself to be one of our most, one of America's most dependable partners, one of its most reliable allies. More so than, frankly speaking, many of our own NATO colleagues and NATO partners. So my first recommendation would be to continue to do what Georgia's doing, which is being a committed and a net contributor to transatlantic security. I would also suggest that from an outsider's point of view, it's very important that the domestic political situation stays domestic. And the issue of NATO accession is not a party political issue in Georgia for the most part. There are certain fringe elements, of course, that are against this, but the vast majority of the political elite, the establishment here, support joining NATO. And in fact, in my paper, I recommend a couple of things that can help show this and demonstrate the seriousness of this commitment to NATO to the international audience. And one of them is, at the upcoming NATO summit, the official Georgian delegation should include representatives from the credible opposition. For those in the opposition who want to support NATO membership, they should be part of the delegation to show the rest of NATO that this isn't a party political issue in NATO. This is a national issue in Georgia. The people of Georgia are united behind this, and here's a demonstration of this national commitment. Another example I give, and it's been done before, so it should be doable. That is some sort of joint statement ahead of the summit. I think this would go a long way, because sometimes these domestic issues spill over into the international stage, and personally, I think it's a sign of a growing and vibrant democracy. I mean, I look at the United States right now. You want to talk about political drama? We're #1 in the world for this almost, in terms of in democracies at least. But on the big issues of on Russia and dealing with the big challenges, there's a lot of bipartisan support in Capitol Hill. So it would be great to see, that same sort of effort going into the summit. In terms of my most controversial well, I would describe as my favorite, but it could be viewed as the most controversial recommendation about joining the alliance with the provision of Article 5 being temporarily, and I stress the word temporary here, being temporarily not applied to the occupied regions. I would say at the end of the day, this is not a matter for the United States or any other country in Europe. This is a matter for the Georgian government and the Georgian people. The Georgian people give the mandate to the government, and then the government fulfills that mandate. And if the Georgian people decide that this is a route that they would like to go down, I think the U.S. and the rest of NATO should be very supportive. If at the end of the day this isn't the route that the government wants to go down, then the U.S. should continue to be supportive and continue to drive to get Georgia across the finish line. But I know we're coming to the end, and I just want to stress one more point as clearly as I can. In my proposal, I am not asking or suggesting that Georgia give up on its territorial integrity, and NATO should never ask Georgia to give up on its territorial integrity. One of the things that attracted me to Georgia many years ago was the pride in this country, the history, the culture, the people, the identity of this country. And I'll tell you this, Georgia has been around way before NATO was created, and thousands of years from now, Georgia will be here after NATO is gone. And if the cost of joining NATO is giving up on your territorial integrity, personally, I would say it's not worth the cost. But thankfully, no one's asking you to do that.
So now we have nailed this down finally, I think. So we have only 10 minutes and around 300 questions, so I don't know what to do. Please just ask questions very, very briefly so that we can hear the answers also. This hand was here from the previous round, so I will start with
Thank you very much. I'm Fatma Ceren Yazgan. I'm the new Turkish ambassador. And as having been the only NATO member, ally, who is having a land border with Georgia and has some coastline in the Black Sea, it's been a very interesting discussion. And thank you very much for making this discussion possible. My question, and of course I don't need to repeat here that our country, and as Ambassador Kelly said, we think Georgia should be a member now. Let's not be defeatist about things. However, the Georgian sovereignty and territorial integrity is sacred. That's also said. My question is about actually the European part. I've heard very clearly about the US interest, which is coinciding with the Turkish interest. I'd like to hear your views, Luke, about the European interest, and how do you think your recommendations will be taken by Europe? And when we say Europe, I'm assuming you're saying European allies in NATO. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I owe 30 seconds to Georgi.
Oh, thank you. Luke, my quick question to Luke. Luke, you remember in 2008 when you worked for then Shadow Defense Secretary Liam Fox in London, of course, and when you were so helpful in rallying support for Georgia in the Conservative Party and beyond in London. Would you imagine that in just a few years Russia would unleash military aggression against another neighbor on much larger scale? And even despite that, 10 years after all these efforts that you exerted, when Western leaders meet their Russian colleagues at the highest level, they would be mentioning the withdrawal of Russian troops from Georgia less and less. Or, for example, when NATO-Russia Council met, Georgia was not really on the agenda. Why do you think is that?
Thanks, Georgi. And Misha Darchiashvili, right there.
Thank you, Jota. I want to welcome the panelists and especially our good friend Luke, and thank for his excellent report. And actually, your recommendation concerning the Article 6, it's really rational, and I'm really sorry that you have to make so many explanations here. So it's good. Thank you, my friend. So clearly, the implementation of those recommendations you put in your paper requires leadership from the United States. And of course, the role of the executive branch is clear, but let's not underestimate the role of the United States Congress, who played a giant role in promoting U.S.-Georgia strategic partnership, and the latest example, like javelins, it's, of course, kudos goes to the administration, but also the role of the amendment initiated by Senator McCain in 2012 was, I think, the driving force of the entire process. So could you please give us your sense what could be the role of the United States Congress in this process to implement your recommendations? Thanks.
Okay, so unfortunately we're out of time, so I would ask all the panelists to answer the questions they want to answer and also kind of sum up the discussion, and then yeah, we have to finish at some point. So Luke, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you. It's a very good question, especially coming from the Turkish point of view, where okay, coming from the Turkish ambassador, representing a country that has really been, as we say in English, led down the garden path for a very long time on European integration, but without seeing any sort of tangible results. And the sort of like disappointment and letdown that must be felt by many of your fellow countrymen and women. You know, I want to avoid a similar situation with that in Georgia. And I think there are some, you know, in the case of your country, if I may be so frank, yeah, I know, but you know, I think it's the case of, in some cases, xenophobia in certain European capitals, if I'm being honest. But in the case of Georgia and some of the challenges it has in Europe, I would say it's, you know, an uncomfortably close relationship to Moscow that some certain NATO members have. And so that's going to be a big challenge. Not insurmountable, but it'll be a challenge nevertheless. On Georgi, I remember him during the invasion. I was working in the House of Commons, and he was only a grad student, and he was phoning up members of Parliament saying, "Hey, what's the UK doing?" A great, passionate defender of Georgia, and that's when we first met back in 2008. And he asked me if I could envision just a few years later, you know, Russia doing a similar thing to, you know, another country, in this case Ukraine. My answer would have been yes, I could imagine it. Many people warned of this and were laughed at, mocked at the time. I think even Sarah Palin mentioned this, so it was pretty obvious, let's say. So I think we have to, it goes back to my earlier point about you never know what's going to happen in the next, you know, 10 years. We need to be ready, and we need to be prepared for any eventuality. And Misha's question about the role of the U.S. Congress, I'm very glad he asked this. This is so important, especially, you know, I had this unique experience as an American to work in the House of Commons, and you know, one thing I learned was how the legislative branch in the U.S. really has foreign policy influence and power in a way that many of the parliamentary democracies in Europe does not. The U.S. Congress has appropriations authority, authorization authority. It can make U.S. foreign policy, it can break U.S. foreign policy, and it certainly can edit U.S. foreign policy. And that's not necessarily the same with the various parliaments in Europe. So I recommend this to all of America's allies. Engage with the U.S. Congress. When you come to Washington, don't just go to the executive, you have to go to the Congress. And one of the great advantages that Georgia has is very strong bipartisan support for Georgia's entry into NATO. And it will be with various offices in the U.S. Senate and in the U.S. House of Representatives that over the course of 2018 I'm going to passionately and personally work with to try to get my recommendation about the conditional sanctions in place. So again, that's all I have. Thank you everybody for coming here to listen tonight. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you first of all for all the questions and for all the replies. Thanks once again, Luke, for this discussion and positions expressed. I believe that today's session showed that Georgia is united and is very much committed towards the goal of NATO membership, that NATO membership of Georgia is in the interest, first of all, of Georgia, and definitely it is in the interest of the European Union and the United States. We believe that this path will lead to prosperity, stability and security of our country. And also most important was the message which was sent again by the author that NATO membership of Georgia is not about leaving the issue of territorial integrity of Georgia aside. So territorial integrity and sovereignty is the major priority, and all other foreign policy actions of Georgia serves this interest.
Well, thank you, Shota, for moderating this very interesting panel discussion, and special thanks to Luke Coffey, too, for this very stimulating and very necessary report. I just told the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister earlier today that 2017 was, I think, really kind of a high water mark for U.S.-Georgia relations, and I will admit to you that I never would have thought last year at this time that I'd be saying that 2017 was one of the best years for U.S.-Georgian cooperation. And I think a major reason for that is the U.S. and I think Europe too has woken up, and the mask is off of Russia. The mask of Russia as being a reliable partner. We know that they're not a reliable partner, and we know that we need to ensure that not only do we push back against Russian aggression, but that we reinforce the mechanisms that bring us together, where we cooperate, and of course the most important of those is NATO. So again, thank you, Shota, and thank you, Luke. I was very pleased to participate in this session.
Thank you. Very brief comment on the European dimension of building a new security arrangements to deter Russian aggression. First of all, I think that the key component, the favorable factor we have right now, is the common threat perception, which Russia tries somehow to split in Europe and in the free world, because largely it's Russia's fight against the free world and the values of the free world. On the other side, another supportive factor is that the Black Sea became a center of the European new security architecture. The Warsaw Summit NATO communique mentions Black Sea 8 times in 5 different articles. That's a huge opportunity for us, not only Black Sea littoral countries, but the wider players involved, to build a momentum on this, and they have a very strong and coherent strategy. But again, coming to the point that I made in the beginning, this vision and this process can only be successful with the U.S. leadership. And now we clearly see the major indicators of the U.S. leadership, whether it would be direct military assistance or legislative acts that cement the approach how to deter Russia's aggressive revisionism. Now the actions of the particular countries, first of all, need to be based, European countries, needs to be based on the sense of solidarity containing the common threat we have. And this common threat is Russia. Russia is the #1 threat, and therefore it needs to be contained.
Thank you so much. I think it is a great challenge to summarize this very interesting discussions for the moderator. I will try to do it in 3 sentences. And I think that the 2 things that that are out of debate in this room and also in the wider audiences is that Georgia will certainly become a member of NATO, as was decided during the Bucharest summit, because it is in interests of NATO, it is in interests of the United States, it is in interests of Europe, and it is in interests of Georgia. And then, second thing also that is out of discussions here is that it will do so under its internationally recognized borders. So there is no doubt about that. There are two important things as a takeaway for me from this panel. The rest of the things we can discuss, we can debate, we can argue what is the shortest way to get there, what are the possibilities, etc. But these two key takeaways I would say are the key that were highlighted in all the questions, in the spirit of discussion, and by all the panelists. And to echo what also Batu said, it's of course obvious that Russia does not have any reason to fear of Georgia's NATO membership. And that this was very well reflected in Deputy Minister Karasin's recent statement, where he was shocked and very much concerned about the very good shape of the Vaziani base. He just said that it is unacceptable for him and for Russia that Vaziani military base is becoming a real good Western standard European military base, and this is the concern to Russia. So this very well reflects that it is not about the Georgia's NATO membership or the threat that Georgia's NATO membership might bring to Russia, but it is about the problem with the proper development processes in this country, with the democratic development of this country, with getting away from the Russia's orbit as far as possible, which is the choice of the majority of the population of this country. So I don't know if it was a summary good enough, but I want to thank the Heritage Foundation, the Economic Policy Research Center for organizing this debate, all the panelists for being here with us, and especially Luke Coffey for coming up with this very timely report. Thank you so much.